is when there's this dynamic that's going on between each of them. And it's a trap where anything the other one says, the other person thinks they know what that person meant because they know them so well and from past history. And they often will misinterpret what a person meant. So let's say the spouse A says something, spouse B takes it to mean a certain thing as if it was a criticism of them, and they react to that. And spouse A is like, what? Where are you coming from? Because spouse B did not understand what spouse A meant by the words that spouse A used. So that's one of the biggest patterns to interrupt.
I'm Rachel Green, divorce mediator and collaborative attorney. Join me as I chat about everything from smoothly navigating your way through divorce to prenups, all the while keeping the kids in mind. Hi, I'm Rachel Green. I'm so glad you decided to join us for Keep the Kids in Mind. Today, we are very lucky to be joined by Andrea Hirshman, who is one of the premier divorce mediators and collaborative law attorneys in New York City. After learning the limitations of litigation, Andrea saw divorce mediation and collaborative divorce as more dignified forms for divorcing couples settling the terms of their divorce. People want to understand, be understood, and in general, treated as if they matter. When working with Andrea, clients feel connected to themselves, their soon-to-be ex, and Andrea as well. Andrea, welcome.
Thank you. It's nice to be here. Thank you for having me.
So just to begin, can you share with us what has called you to this work and why you have chosen this strange field of working with families who are struggling with restructuring and so many things that can feel very overwhelming, as we know, to our clients?
That's all true, for sure. So unfortunately, some of that is familiar to me. And as a child myself, my parents got divorced, and it was a very ugly divorce. But even before that ugly divorce, there was a lot of conflict in my family. And nobody ever spoke about it. It was just sort of pushed under the rug. Everyone ran from it. And it was very disconnecting. I think we all want to feel connected. And I never understood it. And it always felt like there was an elephant in the room.
Wow. So you had a very high conflict home. Like, was there a lot of yelling?
Oh, yes. It was an abusive home. There was a lot of abuse and a lot of yelling. Yes, for sure. So, I remember growing up, I have distinct memories of sitting in the backseat of my car, squished in with my 3 siblings. So there were 4 of us, looking out the window, just saying, when I get older, I'm doing it differently. And I didn't know how I was going to do it, but I just knew that I would never treat people this way and that I would want to get to the bottom of things.
Mm-hmm.
And so, there is no avoiding conflict. If there's conflict, look, we're human beings, so we all get into conflict. So if there's conflict, you can't just push it to the side. It will always rear its ugly head. You have to move through it. And so that's...
Did you try? I mean, I'm just like, how old were you when you identified the fact that nobody was talking about it?
I have memories of looking in the window. I probably was like 8 years old. Or probably.
And did you try to talk about it? Like, did you ever say to your mother, I hate when you...
Yeah, I was the target in the family. And part of the reason why I got clobbered the way I did is because I did try and talk about it. So then, of course, you couldn't talk about it. So then I couldn't help it. So noises would just come out of my mouth, like, like, stop it or whatever, and still get clobbered. So, no. Yeah.
Well, I guess this is reminding me of that phrase, if it doesn't kill you, it makes you stronger.
I think that's true.
You grew up with this high strife in your household, and then you became somebody who's dedicated to trying to resolve that kind of conflict for other families, other people, and help people to keep their kids in mind.
Absolutely.
Which just sounds like your parents were not able to do.
Unfortunately not. But yes, I do enjoy doing the work because I like to help the parents through the conflict when there's children involved. I like to see what I can do to help them figure out how to move forward in a way that they're not so angry with each other, so that they can at least work together and think together about the child. And that's what will help the child thrive, is knowing that their parents can still think about them and plan together for them.
So I'm my brain is going in two directions right now because I guess why don't we start? I mean, just continuing with your childhood, if you don't mind.
Okay.
I mean, I'm just wondering, like, how old were you when your parents started their divorce process, and how old were you when it was finished?
I was 13 when they told us we were getting divorced. They sat us all around the kitchen table, not kitchen, the dining room table, and told us that they were going to do a trial separation. And it was a month before we all went to sleepaway camp. And that when we came back from sleepaway camp, that my father would no longer be in the house. And it was litigious. It went to court. I was called to court to testify.
Oh my God.
All were. Anything that we said that came out of our mouths was used by my father. My father was the one that called us to court. Used everything that we might have ever said against my mother.
And he was an attorney, right?
Yes, he was. But right before we were supposed to testify, my mother just gave in, and because she didn't want us to do that, she was thinking about us there.
Oh my God, that's so ironic. He was giving evidence about her being a bad parent, and she was actually the parent who was thinking about how it was impacting the children.
That is true. I never thought of it like that, but it's 100% true. So the divorce came through 3 years later. And this was all before the Child Support Standards Act. So he went on to not support us. And my mother went to court and sued him for the arrears. And they often got forgiven, which is impossible today.
Right. So that's an improvement of things for children.
100%.
Yeah. So you don't just, talk the talk, but you lived it. You walked the walk.
Well, I'm not walking it now, but yes, I did live it as a
No,
child.
but I mean, as
Yeah.
a child, like your experience must inform your guidance of your clients because you experience, you must tell them some of the pitfalls, and you don't really want to talk to your children about that because it's going to hurt them.
Yes, I would say that I would say that I am strong in the area of helping clients see how their children are in the middle.
Yeah. And then the other direction I wanted to go in was when you said when people are really fighting with each other in a mediation or in a collaborative process, what are some of the tools you use to work through the anger?
So this is when there's this dynamic that's going on between each of them, and it's just sort of like a trap. It's where anything the other one says, the other person thinks they know what that person meant because they know them so well and from past history. And they often will misinterpret what a person meant. If let's say the spouse A says something, spouse B takes it to mean a certain thing as if it was a criticism of them, and they react to that, and then they respond from that reaction. And the speaking spouse, spouse A, thank you so much. Spouse A is like, what? Where are you coming from? Because spouse B did not understand what spouse A meant by the words that spouse A used.
Right. But they thought they knew what spouse A meant.
Yes. And so that's one of the biggest patterns to interrupt because spouse B believed their assumptions. They believed that what spouse A said meant something, and they didn't check in to say, whoa, I feel like you just called me an idiot. Is that what you meant? Instead, they just assume that they called them an idiot, and then they respond. And then we're into this cycle of, that's where the conflict begins, right there, by the misunderstanding or the misinterpretation. And they respond.
Right. Because B feels like A called them an idiot.
Yes. So B responds, and now A's defensive because now they feel attacked. And then the cycle just goes and goes and goes. And one of the tools that I use and that many mediators use, we all use it. It's called many different things. It can be called active listening, reflective listening. In the model of mediation that I practice, it's called looping. And what we do is we try to loop what spouse A said. So if spouse B says that, we might say, wait, let me just make sure I understood spouse A. I'll say that to spouse B. I might even say, I'm not sure that that's what I heard. And then I'll ask spouse A, I will turn to spouse A and say, tell me if I understood you correctly. And I will reflect what I understood them to say. Now, in understanding, trying to understand what somebody says, if you really want to do what's known as deep listening, and I'm only starting to learn more and more about that, you're listening not just for the content of what they said, but you're also listening for the context of what if you know that this person came from an abusive background, then you might know that, the reasons why they said that were informed by that abuse. And you're listening for meaning in the end. But in any case, you try to reflect back to this person, loop back to them what you understood them to say. And you wait to hear that speaker say to you, well, not exactly. That's not exactly what I meant. And then when you're looping, you would say, well, you keep going until they say, yes, exactly. Finally, someone understands. And the way you keep going is you said, tell me what I missed. Tell me more. And when someone says, finally, someone understands, that closes the loop. The advantage of doing all this is that sometimes when the other person who's listening, spouse B, sometimes when they hear a third party reflect what the spouse A just said, it's easier for them to understand what that person said, what the meaning is of what they said.
So they no longer hear it as A calling B an idiot.
Yes.
B now goes, oh, maybe A was actually trying to talk about picking up the kids from after school.
Right, whatever it might be, but it's not that they called me an idiot. So now they can hear what the other person meant. And the importance of that is that it's when there's understanding, if you can understand what you might disagree with, that's where the room is to find resolution. You don't have to agree with it, but to get out of sort of this binary construct of right and wrong, or it's binary, but to be able to get out of that and instead expand your understanding and understand why somebody is coming from where they're coming from and what they're saying, it brings out the humanity of it. And sometimes when the humanity is brought out, people can understand it because they have that in their own lives. And it makes some room for a willingness and flexibility to try and find a resolution. So yes, I do that. It's called looping. That's what I'll do when people are really angry at each other, is I will try to interrupt it. And sometimes it won't work. You have to then say, I notice there's a certain dynamic between the two of you. So you might loop that, reflect that, and ask them if it's working for them. And would they like to change it? If not, would they like to change it?
So that was a great explanation of active listening / looping.
Oh, thank you.
So there's something that is now called deep listening that you're learning about?
Yeah. I'm just started to listen to some podcasts of Oscar Trimboli, and it's pretty much, I'm really at level one of it. So I can't really talk too much about it. I just know that a big part of it is listening for what's not said.
My daughter, as you know, is interested in politics, and she's a low-level position with the Democratic Party here. And she's been trained in something called deep canvassing, which is, I wonder if it's connected to this deep listening, because it's about how you try to talk to people not about, being a Republican or being a Democrat or your position on different issues. Instead, you try to talk to them about, well, what are things that are meaningful in your life? Who are the people who matter to you? What are some concerns you have about, their lives? And that you can get down to a deeper level, and then you can gently say, oh, so you're worried about your grandson going to preschool and the cost of that. Historically, Democrats have put more money into preschools than Republicans have. Like just at the very end, you can say that, but like you try to connect to them on a human level.
Right. I think it is related because what we're trying to do in mediation is you're trying to get the person's understory, so to speak. You're trying to find out what's underneath
The
what
position.
they're saying, their position. Because oftentimes it's not about what they're fighting about. There's always some kind of energy that's fueling the conflict that's not being spoken about.
Mm.
It's under the table. And if you can bring that up to the table about what's not being discussed, that often is where the commonality can be found.
So do you have any examples of stories from your clients with changing their names, of course, to protect their privacy? But any stories that you'd like to share about, when this worked really well or when it didn't work very well, or things you've seen families do that worked well or didn't work well?
Well, I'll tell you one. I did one story does come to mind where there was this couple and getting divorced, and the husband is trying. I can't remember the contents of what he was trying to say, but he was taking a very long time in saying it and trying to figure out how to say it. And the wife was getting very impatient and pretty much felt like just spit it out. And so, in getting underneath that dynamic, what came out was that the husband often feels that the wife gets mad at him for things that he says, things that he does. So he developed a self-protective pattern, so to speak, of trying to figure out how to say something so she wouldn't get mad. But it became a self-fulfilling prophecy because then he would take so long or he wouldn't be direct and it would trigger her into just just tell me. And so here he didn't want her to get mad, but in trying to feed that fear of his, he actually caused her to get mad at him. And I was able to point that dynamic out to them, and they really appreciated that. And he tried to be much more direct in everything that he said afterwards for the rest of the mediation. I mean, it really was a breakthrough, I thought. So
Yeah, that's a great
that
story.
was looping a dynamic. So I thought that was, very helpful.
Yeah, that is right. I guess we all do that. We all have behaviors that perpetuate patterns of the way people treat us, but we can't really see ourselves, the things that we're doing that cause people to treat us that way. We can see it more easily in other people. I mean, I remember I've had over the years, I've had a couple of clients who were just very unpleasant people. Every time I had an interaction with them, I'm thinking about one woman, and then another couple, and the man was like this. They were always sort of combative, complaining about how long the process was taking, putting me on the defensive. You're the mediator. You should be blah, 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 to get it done. And of course, it's not my divorce. I can guide them. I can talk to them about options, but they have to make the decisions in mediation, and in collaborative divorce too. So I remember thinking, like, everybody that you interact with, you must think is really like nasty and cold. And I mean, I was working with this person for 4 or 5 months, but he had to live inside his skin and be that person his whole life. And it's just it's amazing how much what we put out is what we get back.
Right. So it's an interesting thing that you bring up because, you saying that, you felt that maybe, how did you put it? You said that this person, everyone in their life,
Critical and combative and always looking at the negative. Yeah.
right? But you said that it must be that everyone in his life was cold and something like that.
Yeah, cold and wanting to end interactions with him as soon as possible. And
Right. So yeah. So that's sort of like listening for what's not said. because sometimes it's useful to say, okay, we're going to go off topic here for a second. I want to check in with you and use it. And when we do reflective listening or looping, which is what we call it, and also in deep listening, I remember hearing this also. It's not enough just to know how to sort of reframe or paraphrase what somebody said and get it right. You have to want to really understand them. And so if in and you can use yourself to do that. So Rachel, I hear you saying that, when this guy was talking, it just felt so negative and so, and difficult. And you heard yourself saying like, wow, I wonder, he must think everybody's that way towards him. That's an opportunity to use those thoughts and to say, if I could just check in with you for a second, I can see that you're upset. And it feels like as if you go through the world like this. And I'm just wondering if you can talk a little bit more about what's going on for you inside. Something like that. I mean, I got to tell you, it's not easy to do. And I'm afraid to do it because I feel like I'm putting the person on the spot. I'm not good at, I don't do this. I'm trying to learn how to do this. Let's put it that way, because I'm really afraid the person will yell at me and scream. And that's where my stuff is. I don't want to be yelled at or screamed at because I have my triggers. But it's useful to use what's going on inside of you to see if it's going on inside of anyone else in the room. And sometimes it really opens things up. And sometimes the person says, no, that's not it. And you just say, okay. And then you just move on. So, but clearly the context for this fella, his understory has to have something involved with having really been mistreated as a child, somewhere for a long time, probably as a child when he was vulnerable. So that it made him the way he is. And that's the
right. And he got a message from his parents that the world is a very unfriendly, dangerous place. And you have to always be ready to,
Right. And so then you can ask, how's that working for you? So it's always been like that. Is that the choice you want to make?
Yeah, I guess I'm wondering though, where do we draw the line between mediation and therapeutic intervention, which neither of us are therapists, even though we both have a lot of informal training in psychology and our own life experiences, but we're not therapists. So.
I agree 100%. Where do you draw that line? It's really hard. But so the purpose, again, the understory is just to help figure out the future and moving forward. So it's not to really delve into, how your construct, your emotional construct and internal landscape came to being. It's just to understand the context and asking in that moment, is that the choice you want to make here for figuring out how you want to set things up for the future? Because the terms you agree to, we do divorce mediation, the terms you agree to in your divorce are going to set you up for your future. So it's very difficult. It is a fine line. And that's why, I have to get better at it.
And look at how you're teaching me while you're on my podcast to not have, not rush to judgment of this person who has this negative and defensive outlook consistently, but instead to kind of step back and say, observe the dynamic, and say, you seem to approach everything that your spouse says negatively. Can you think of anything that's not negative?
Right. I'm not quite sure how we would reflect that because that's like I said, together we could try and get better at this.
You're just a Debbie Downer. Could you please stop?
Yeah, right. But the idea is for us, for them to feel understood, they have to feel our compassion, right?
Right.
And for us to have the compassion, we have to, if we're feeling negative things, we have to figure out what the heck that is inside of us. And is there a way that we can use it to become compassionate?
Yeah, no, I think of it, like those cartoon bubbles that our trainer always used to say, that you want to have like the thoughts, who that person is, you want to have equal sized bubbles of the two people. And you don't want one person's bubble to be, huge and the other person's bubble is this big.
Right.
And I guess I was moving in that direction with this guy who was so negative, and I felt like, oh, he's just negative. But we're all the star of our own movie. So what's his movie about? Why is he this way? He's this way because somewhere along the line, he learned a lesson that this is the best way to be. That's what he thinks. That's what he believes.
Right. Right. So I don't know. I know that when I reflected it, I said, it seems like but people don't like that. So I wouldn't do that because we're just, like I told you, I'm not good at it. I'm learning and we're going forward. But I guess reflecting, you seem upset or you seem angry. Can you speak a little bit more about that? I don't know, like something like that.
Right. An open-ended question.
Or can you say more about why you feel that way? And try and get under it. And it's interesting you said something about a movie because in one of the deep listening podcasts that I listened to, so Oscar Trimboli was doing something for some corporate group leaders that were in the room, and in order to get at what wasn't being said, he asked people if they could describe what movie they feel like they're in right now, to describe the situation, the work, if they had to describe it. And everybody described like Titanic or, movies where there were disasters. Everyone named a disaster movie. And so the head honcho was like, whoa, I do not want to be the head honcho of disaster. And it just opened up a lot of, it opened up the conversation somehow. So I don't know. Maybe we ask our clients, what movie are you sitting in right now?
Yeah.
I don't know. I mean,
yeah, but they might say The Marriage Story or
right. It's true. One thing I want to say is I was going to say, I don't know, like, huh?
The Squid and the Whale. There's so many divorce movies.
It's true. And then I guess it would be like, and how is that how you want it to go? I don't know. So,
yeah.
But
so, yeah.
One thing I wanted to just say about understanding, one of the things I also learned from the Deep Listening podcast is that we human beings speak about 150 words on average a minute. If you speak slower, you speak 125, which is what Oscar Trimboli speaks. But our brain thinks at 900 words a minute. So like we're picking, as every time we speak, we're like going through, as he uses a washing machine analogy, the wash is all going in there. It's sudsy, it's messy, and we're trying to put out 100 words to 150 words to say what we're thinking, right? He says that's a 1 in 9 chance of getting it right, what we're of saying what we actually mean. And he says, if somebody told you had 11%, so that's 1 out of 9 is 11%, he says. I didn't check the math. But anyway, so if someone tells you you have an 11% chance in surviving a surgery, you would go get a second opinion, right? So similarly, washing machines, they have all these rinse cycles, right? So the rinse cycle is like the second chance to like go through it, rinse it out, and then take out more words from the 800 remaining to say more precisely what you mean. So part of why we get into these conflict traps, where you think you understand what the person meant to say, but you actually didn't because you didn't check in and you just reacted based on your assumptions. It's most likely that the person, whatever they said, did not state exactly what they meant. And so our job as listener is really to help the speaker get more precise about what it is they mean. And so by reflecting and doing looping, a lot of times they'll say, well, actually what I meant was, and we shouldn't lambast people for, or, bash them. I'm not sure if I used the right word, but we shouldn't bash people if they, because a lot of times say, well, that's what you said. But if we could just give people the generosity and the benefit of the doubt that there's a good chance most of us don't say exactly what we mean to say when we first speak. And just to first say to the people, can you say a little bit more about that? That we would have less conflict in our lives in general.
Yeah, that's beautiful.
Isn't that interesting?
Awesome. Yes.
I know. So he's worth listening to.
Yeah. So if there were 2 or 3 takeaways that you would want people who are thinking of participating in mediation or a collaborative process, we didn't really talk about the differences between those processes, but both of them are out of court, focused on negotiating a settlement focusing on underlying needs and interests, not just positions. So if there were 2 or 3 things you would want to say to people as takeaways, what would they be?
I would say in general, when it feels like something your spouse has said is an attack on you, to not believe it, to check in first, to ask, is this what you meant? And give them a chance to then explain it further. Another thing is to remember that our brains think in 900 words a minute, but we can only speak 150 words a minute. And therefore assume that what the person has just said, especially if you don't like it, might not be what they actually meant. So
And it's probably not complete.
Right.
Because they're thinking 900 words and they're only saying 100.
Just gets you into the ballpark, into the area of what they mean to say. And I didn't say this before, but I do like to say this. I know you and I have discussed it before, that, but it's a takeaway I'd like people to take, even though I didn't say it before. And it's very similar and basically what we've been talking about, which is that try to remember that when we say something, it lands on the person, and the impact it has on that person might feel hurtful, even though it's not what you intended. And so we tend to judge people by by the people's words, by the impact it has on us. But yet we judge our own words by our intention. So try to give the person the benefit of the doubt and check in with what did they intend. So.
Yeah. And that's interesting too, because if somebody says something that hurts us, we don't stop to think that they may have intended something completely different. And they have no idea that we're feeling hurt because they didn't intend to hurt us. Right. So they figure we must be not hurt. Yeah.
Right. And just about that. And even if we, in that moment, well, sometimes we can regulate and ourselves and say, okay, they probably intended something else, but nonetheless, it's still hurt. And so a real apology is not, well, I intended this. A real apology is, I'm sorry that I hurt you.
Yeah.
Even if it wasn't your intention.
Right.
So.
And did you ever get a chance to talk to your siblings about the conflict that you all grew up with?
Oh, yes. And my mother has apologized through tears many times for the abuse inflicted. And she has been on her own journey, and since her 30s, she had 4 children by the time she was 23. So,
oh my God.
In her mid 30s, she finally went for therapy, but the damage was already done. So, but she is now 90, still alive, and she's wonderful. And not only that, she's doing deep canvassing herself. 90 years old.
She is. Wow.
Deep canvassing in Florida.
Wow. Yeah. All right. Well, thank you so much for taking the time to talk to me this morning, Andrea. You and I could talk for hours and hours.
I could keep going.
As we have at times, but I think our podcast listeners might have other things they need to do today. So thanks so much for joining us. Keep the kids in mind.
Thanks so much. Bye.
Bye.